The morning at the precinct started the same way it always did. The sun had barely risen, its soft golden light spilling through the dusty windows and catching on the old bulletin boards lined with memos and missing person notices. The hum of the coffee machine in the corner was almost as steady as the low murmur of voices from officers gathered near their desks. Swapping quick stories before heading out on patrol, some laughed quietly over inside jokes, others yawned as they flipped through paperwork or tapped on keyboards. Officer Daniels leaned back in his chair, boots propped casually on the edge of his desk. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair that somehow made him look more intimidating rather than older. His eyes scanned the room with the confidence of someone who had been there long enough to feel untouchable. Daniels had a reputation, the kind people didn't always say out loud, but everyone seemed to know. To his friends, he was the sharp-tongued, no-nonsense cop who got the job done. To others, he was arrogant, quick to judge, and not exactly careful with his words when it came to certain people. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching the rookies hurry past him with reports in their hands. He liked mornings like this, quiet, predictable, the kind where nothing felt like it could surprise him. In his mind, he had control of his world here. This was his precinct, his comfort zone, and no one could challenge him inside these walls. Few desks away, Sergeant Miller was briefing a couple of younger officers, his voice firm but low. There was talk about a new batch of internal policy reviews coming up, the kind of thing most people brushed off unless they had something to hide. Daniels didn't bother to pay attention. He'd been through enough of these so-called reviews to know they were just routine paperwork. Nothing ever came of them, not for someone like him. In the hallway, the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the faint scent of rain on the pavement outside. A few officers were coming in from the morning shift change, shaking water from their jackets, boots leaving faint wet prints on the tiled floor. Phones rang at the front desk, clerks shuffled case files, and somewhere in the distance, a copier groaned as it spat out another stack of forms. Daniel stretched in his chair, cracking his knuckles. He glanced at the clock, 8:47 a.m. Still plenty of time before anything important was scheduled. The thought of the day ahead felt comfortably ordinary. A couple of patrol runs, maybe an arrest if he was lucky, paperwork in between, and then clock out without a second thought. But as he scanned the room again, he caught a few glances from other officers, quick, almost nervous looks exchanged between them. It wasn't enough to alarm him, but it was different. Usually, the morning chatter was light, easy. But now there seemed to be a tension in the air that didn't belong there. He frowned slightly, wondering if something had happened overnight that he hadn't heard about. He decided not to dwell on it, brushing off the unease with a sip of coffee. Whatever it was, he was sure it didn't concern him. Daniels had a way of believing that any trouble brewing in the precinct was for other people, not for him. He stood up, adjusted his belt, and wandered toward the break room for a refill. On the way, he passed Officer Grant, who gave him a polite nod but didn't hold his gaze. Strange, Daniels thought. Grant was usually chatty in the mornings, full of small talk about the news or sports. But today he seemed distracted, almost like he didn't want to get caught in a conversation. The hum of the precinct continued, phones ringing, radios crackling with dispatch calls. Officers coming and going, but there was something just beneath it. Like the quiet before a storm, Daniels didn't know it yet, but that storm was already moving toward him. And it was about to arrive at the front doors in a way he never could have expected. He poured another cup of coffee, leaned on the counter, and looked out the break room window at the street below. It was a normal scene, cars crawling through the wet morning traffic, a couple of pedestrians hurrying under umbrellas. Nothing out there gave him any reason to think today would be any different from yesterday. But if he'd been paying closer attention, he might have noticed the black sedan pulling up to the curb outside. He might have seen the reflection of a sharply dressed woman stepping out, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. He might have realized that she wasn't just visiting the precinct, she was coming for him. Inside, the clock ticked toward 9. Daniels took another slow sip of coffee, still convinced this would be another predictable day in just a few minutes. That belief would be shattered, and the first crack in his sense of control was already forming, even if he couldn't see it yet. By the time the clock hit 9, the usual noise in the precinct had shifted. It wasn't the easy chatter of coworkers swapping small talk anymore. There was a current of low, clipped conversations like people didn't want to be overheard. Daniels noticed it almost instantly, though he pretended not to care. He strolled back to his desk with his fresh cup of coffee, leaning lazily in his chair as if the room was his living room. Across the aisle, 2 officers stood close together, whispering in quick bursts before glancing toward the main entrance. Another pair huddled over a desk, one of them sliding a folder half under a stack of papers when Daniels walked past. Something going on? He asked casually, raising an eyebrow. The younger of the 2 forced a smile. Just regular updates, he said, but his tone was too quick. To rehearse, Daniels smirked. He'd been in the force long enough to know when people were lying. And they were definitely lying. He figured maybe someone had gotten caught bending the rules, maybe a rookie in trouble for sloppy paperwork, or an officer under review for a botched arrest. Whatever it was, Daniels thought it was probably going to be entertaining. He'd seen plenty of people sweat under internal affairs interviews before, and he always enjoyed watching the pressure turn them inside out. But the tension felt different. This time, it wasn't just 1 or 2 people acting strange. It was the whole room. Even Sergeant Miller, who usually barked orders like a drill sergeant, was quieter than usual, his voice low when talking on the phone from across the room. Daniels caught snippets of his conversation. "They're here already." "Yeah." "In the conference room." "No, I didn't think it would be this soon." "They're here already." The phrase stuck in Daniel's mind. Internal affairs. He thought that had to be it. He'd been through IA checks before, most of the time. They were nothing more than a formality, an investigator asking a few canned questions, reviewing some case files, then disappearing until next year's audit. Daniels never worried about them because he knew how to make his reports look airtight and his stories sound clean. Still, something about the way people were acting now didn't feel like the usual IA visit. For one, they were too careful, like they knew exactly who was being looked at. And they didn't want to get caught in the crossfire. And 2, nobody was. Looking him in the eye, he leaned back, sipping his coffee slowly. Fine, he thought. If IA was here, let them do their little routine. He had nothing to worry about. But then the double doors at the far end of the precinct opened. It was subtle at first, no grand announcement. Just the quiet creak of hinges and the shift of a few heads turning at once. 2 plainclothes officers stepped inside, scanning the room before moving toward the conference area. Behind them, a clerk carried a thick folder. Her eyes straight ahead, her lips pressed tight. Daniel's curiosity sharpened. Whoever they were here for. It wasn't just a quick talk, not with that much paperwork in hand. He smirked again, thinking maybe it was Grant or Miller under the spotlight. That would make for a good laugh later. But as the morning wore on, the whispers kept circling. Every time someone walked past his desk, he could hear fragments. Serious charges, pattern of behavior, multiple complaints. The words made him pause, but he brushed them off. Complaints were a dime a dozen in this line of work. Most of the time, they went nowhere. Still, the longer he sat there, the more it felt like something was closing in. It wasn't paranoia. It was the way everyone kept glancing toward the hallway that led to the conference room, as if they were waiting for someone important to arrive. Someone who would walk through that hallway and change the atmosphere completely. Daniels tapped his fingers on the desk, pretending to focus on his reports. If internal affairs wanted to ask him anything, they'd have to come find him, And when they did, he'd give them the same smooth, confident answers he always gave. After all, he told himself, no one in this building has the authority to shake me. What he didn't know, and what no one dared to tell him, was that the person they were all waiting for had already arrived. She was upstairs, reviewing files, preparing to walk into that room. And when she did, the look on his face would be the first crack in the wall he'd spent years building around himself. The hallway outside the main bullpen had gone unusually quiet. The hum of chatter and clatter of keyboards in the precinct dimmed, as if someone had slowly turned down the volume. It wasn't a sudden silence, but the kind that spreads one corner at a time until the whole room feels it. Daniels didn't notice it at first. He was halfway through his coffee, eyes on his computer screen, but not really reading anything. Then the sound of heels clicking against the polished tile cut through the air. They were steady, unhurried, almost too precise. Each step seemed to echo just enough to turn heads without the person having to say a single word. Daniels looked up, more out of instinct than interest. Two plainclothes internal affairs officers appeared first, stepping into the room with the kind of posture that said they weren't here for friendly conversation. Behind them, a woman entered, her presence commanding without being loud. She was tall, wearing a tailored dark navy suit that fit like it had been made for her. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her eyes sharp and unflinching as they scanned the room. She didn't need to ask for attention. The room gave it to her automatically. Her ID badge caught the light for just a second, but that was enough for the nearest officers to catch the lettering. Head, Internal Affairs. Daniels narrowed his eyes slightly, his smirk still in place. He wasn't impressed by suits. He'd seen plenty of investigators come and go. But there was something about her that didn't fit the usual mold. She didn't carry a clipboard or shuffle papers nervously. She walked like she already knew everything she needed to know. The IA officers flanking her split off, one heading toward the conference room, the other quietly speaking to Sergeant Miller. The woman herself kept moving forward, cutting a direct path through the center of the bullpen. Her gaze swept over desks and faces, not lingering too long on anyone until her eyes locked on Daniels. It wasn't the casual glance of someone taking note of an officer's nameplate. It was sharper, heavier. For just a second, Daniels felt like she was looking through him, like she could see not just the uniform and the desk, but the choices, the words, the incidents he'd buried under layers of confidence. Still, he leaned back, giving her a half smile. He wasn't the type to flinch under a stare, but she didn't smile back, didn't break eye contact. She let the moment hang there, a quiet test of will, before looking away and continuing toward the conference room. A few desks away, someone coughed to break the tension. Daniels pretended to check a file, but in the corner of his eye, he watched her disappear into the room where Aya was already setting up. He noticed something else, too. The way other officers glanced at him after she passed. Quick looks, some pitying, some curious, some almost satisfied. It made the hair on the back of his neck prickle. He hated that feeling, the sense that other people knew something he didn't. Especially in his precinct, where he liked to think he was always the one in control. 15 minutes later, Sergeant Miller called his name. Daniels. Internal Affairs wants to see you, he said, his tone unreadable. Daniels rose from his chair slowly, the smirk still there, though it felt a little tighter now as he walked toward the conference room. The click of the woman's heels still echoed in his head. It wasn't just the sound, it was the certainty behind it. The certainty of someone who had come for a reason. When he stepped inside, she was already seated at the head of the table. Her hands rested lightly on a closed folder, her posture straight, her eyes steady on him, Officer Daniels. She said, her voice calm, professional, and somehow personal. Please, have a seat. And for the first time that morning, Daniels felt the smallest flicker of something he didn't want to name. Not fear, exactly, but the uneasy awareness that this conversation might not go the way he expected. Daniels eased into the chair across from her. He leaned back, letting the wooden legs creak under his weight, as if to show he wasn't intimidated, but her steady gaze didn't waver, and that quiet confidence made the air between them feel heavier. She didn't open the folder right away. Instead, she spoke slowly, deliberately. Her words carefully measured. "Before we begin, Officer Daniels, do you remember me?" The question threw him for just a second. He blinked, glanced at her again, her face, her posture, her voice. Nothing clicked immediately. But something about her eyes tugged at the edges of his memory. He almost said, "No," but he caught himself, sensing that admitting it outright might give her an advantage. "I meet a lot of people in this job," he said with a casual shrug, hard to keep track. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I remember you," she said simply, and then she opened the folder. On top of the stack was a printed still from a body cam video. The image was grainy, but clear enough to show a much younger version of her, standing beside a dark sedan on the side of a road. Her hands rested on the car door, her expression tense. And there he was, Daniels in the frame, towering over her, one hand on his hip, the other gesturing. Mid-sentence, in that instant, it all came rushing back to him. 2 years ago, a late afternoon traffic stop. He'd been in a bad mood, long shift, bad weather, and a driver ahead of her had nearly caused an accident when he pulled her over. She'd asked calmly why she was being stopped. He'd taken her tone as a challenge, instead of answering. Directly, he'd barked at her to stay quiet and cooperate if you know what's good for you. She had stayed calm, but he remembered feeling that flicker of irritation when she didn't shrink under his words, when she asked again, "Am I being detained, or can I leave?" He'd stepped closer, lowering his voice but letting his words drip with arrogance. "You're lucky I'm letting you go with a warning. Some people forget their place. Don't be one of them." He remembered the satisfaction he felt at the time, that smug sense of control, watching her drive away with her jaw tight and eyes forward. He never expected to see her again, and certainly not like this, back in the conference room. She slid the photo aside, revealing a transcript of the body cam audio. Her voice was still calm, but there was an edge to it now. "That day, you wrote in your report that the stop was routine. You didn't mention the comments you made to me. You didn't mention the way you blocked my car door." Daniels shifted slightly in his seat, but forced a smirk. "People get tense during traffic stops. Maybe you misunderstood my tone." Her eyes narrowed just slightly, not in anger, but in that way people do when they're watching a bluff fail. "Oh, I understood perfectly," she said, her tone flat, and so did the 3 witnesses who submitted statements when they saw the footage I obtained. He felt a prickle at the back of his neck. "Witnesses." She reached for another page and slid it toward him. 3 separate names. 3 matching accounts of that day, all describing his behavior in nearly identical terms. "This was before I joined internal affairs," she continued. "I was still working as a legal investigator. I had no authority then, but I told myself if I ever had the chance to hold certain people accountable, I would." Her gaze locked on him again, unblinking, and here we are. Daniels leaned back in his chair, trying to hide the fact that his fingers had tightened slightly around the armrest. It wasn't the traffic stop itself that worried him. It was what she might have connected it to. What other files she might have pulled. What other witnesses she might have spoken to. He forced a laugh, shaking his head. "So this is personal?" Her answer was instant. "No, this is professional. Personal would have been me letting you walk away without having to answer for it. Professional is me doing my job no matter who's sitting in that chair for the first time." The smirk faded from his face completely. The memory of that roadside moment, the casual cruelty. The assumption she'd never matter enough to challenge him. It all sat between them now like a loaded weapon. She was the one holding it. The conference room was colder than the bullpen. The hum of the overhead light filled the silence, mixing with the faint scratch of a pen from one of the internal affairs officers seated in the corner. Daniels sat with his arms crossed, leaning back in the chair like he owned the place, a smirk tugging at his lips. He wasn't going to let anyone see him sweat across from him. She opened her folder again, neatly arranging the documents in front of her. Every movement was measured, deliberate. She didn't rush. She didn't need to. Her silence stretched long enough to make even the air feel heavier. Finally, she looked up, her voice steady and professional. "Officer Daniels, we're here to review a series of complaints filed against you over the past 5 years." Daniels scoffed, waving a hand as if brushing away smoke. "Complaints. Everyone gets complaints. Comes with the badge." She didn't flinch. "Didn't look away. Yes, but not everyone has this many," she replied. Sliding a thick stack of papers across the table, he glanced down dozens of forms, neatly organized, each with his name at the top. For a brief second, his smirk wavered, but he caught it before it slipped completely. "These are all exaggerated," he said smoothly. "You know how it is. People don't like authority. They lash out with paperwork." Her eyes held his, calm and unblinking. "Interesting, because the language in these reports is strikingly consistent," she said, tapping her pen on the stack. "Words like intimidating, demeaning, racially biased." Daniels leaned forward, trying to match her composure with false confidence. "That's just the times we live in. People play that card whenever they don't get their way." She tilted her head slightly, studying him the way a surgeon studies a patient before the first incision. "Is that what you told the woman in the traffic stop 2 years ago? The one you told to know her place?" The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air pressing down. Daniels shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening. "You're twisting that," he said, his voice sharper now. "I don't talk like that." She leaned forward just slightly, her voice calm but cutting. "You don't? Because your body cam suggests otherwise." She clicked a small remote, and the screen on the wall flickered to life. The grainy footage played the stop, his stance, his voice dripping with arrogance. The exact words spilling out, preserved forever. The smirk disappeared completely, replaced by a clenched jaw and narrowed eyes. He looked at her, searching for a crack, some sign that this was personal vengeance. But all he saw was a professional mask of composure she wasn't arguing with. She was dismantling him, piece by piece, with his own history. "Look," he said finally, trying to recover, "I've served this department for 20 years. I've put dangerous people away. I've bled for this job." Her voice remained calm, measured, "and no one is questioning your years of service, Officer Daniels, but serving the public means serving all of them, not just the ones you respect." He hated the way her words landed, not loud or forceful, but undeniable. It wasn't just what she was saying, it was how she was saying it. Controlled, unshaken, every syllable backed by evidence he couldn't erase. Daniels leaned back again, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So what's the point of this? You gonna fire me for being tough on the job?" She tapped the folder once more. "No, Daniels. We're here to determine whether your pattern of behavior has crossed the line from tough policing into misconduct, and whether that misconduct has endangered the very community you swore to protect." The room fell silent again. The officer in the corner kept writing, the scratch of his pen almost loud in the heavy quiet. Daniels drummed his fingers on the table, trying to act bored. But his eyes kept flicking to the stack of papers in front of him. Every sheet, every complaint, every piece of evidence, it was all a mirror he didn't want to look into. And across from him, the woman he once dismissed as powerless sat with Unshakable authority. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for accountability. And for the first time in years, Daniels realized he couldn't charm, bully, or laugh his way out of the room. Asterisk, the folder on the table was no longer just a stack of papers. It was a mountain. And for Daniels, every page felt like a stone, being placed on his chest, one after the other. He tried to mask it with his usual bravado, the smirk, the half-laughs, the dismissive shrugs, but the cracks were beginning to show. She flipped open the file again, her fingers smooth and unhurried. She chose the first page deliberately and slid it across the table toward him. It was a complaint form, dated 4 years ago. A young man had reported being stopped for failure to signal, but claimed Daniels had searched his car without cause, insulted him, and called him boy. Daniels let out a sharp scoff. Ridiculous. That kid was nervous because he was guilty of something. They always are. Without a word, she slid another sheet forward. This one was a witness statement from a bystander who had watched the traffic stop from across the street. The account matched the young man's almost word for word. Daniel's smirk faltered, but he forced himself to lean back in his chair, arms crossed like a shield. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stacked the witness statement on top of the complaint and moved to the next file. 3 years ago, she said calmly, a woman filed a complaint that you used unnecessary force during a routine questioning. She claimed you pushed her against the hood of your patrol car, even after she complied. Daniels rolled his eyes. I restrained her. That's protocol. If they resist, you make sure they can't hurt themselves, or you. Click. The screen on the wall came to life again, this time showing grainy cell phone footage from a bystander. The video showed the woman standing calmly, hands raised, before Daniels shoved her hard against the hood. The room went quiet except for the sound of the recording, her startled cry, the gasps of the people filming. Daniels shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening as he muttered, that doesn't show the whole situation. Her voice was steady. It shows enough. She let the silence linger for a long moment before reaching for the next piece of evidence. It wasn't just one complaint or two, it was a pattern. Dozens of reports, each carrying the same themes: intimidation, disrespect, bias, unnecessary force. And with each report, she paired it with something more. A body cam clip, a witness statement, even internal memos from supervisors who had concerns but never pushed further. Daniel's confidence thinned. With every page, at first, he had leaned back, laughing off the complaints. Now, he was leaning forward without realizing it, eyes darting to the documents as though he might find a loophole or mistake to grab onto. But every piece was airtight, woven together into a tapestry of truth he couldn't tear apart. Finally, she laid down the last document, a summary report compiled by IA staff. It outlined not just the complaints, but the consistent failure to hold him accountable. It painted a picture not of isolated incidents, but of a man who had operated for years under the belief he was untouchable. She folded her hands neatly on the table, her eyes never leaving his. This isn't about one mistake, Officer Daniels. This is about a repeated pattern of behavior that has harmed the very people you swore to protect. This is about trust. Trust you've broken. The words landed harder than any evidence on the table. Daniels opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. For years, he'd built his career on confidence, on the assumption that no one would ever connect the dots or have the courage to challenge him. And now here it was, every dot connected. Every truth dragged into the light by the very woman he once tried to belittle. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The scratching pen of the officer in the corner continued, documenting every word, every pause. For the first time in his career, Daniels wasn't the one in control of the story. Daniels sat in silence, his eyes flicking over the pile of evidence spread across the table like a crime scene he couldn't escape from. For years, he had been the one in control, the one asking questions, the one holding the power to decide. Who was guilty? Who was innocent? Who deserved respect? Now, the tables had turned, and the weight of that shift pressed on him like a spotlight he couldn't move out of. He cleared his throat, leaning back in the chair again, as if trying to claw back some of his swagger. "This is all twisted," he said, his voice lower now, less certain. "You've pulled things out of context. People lie, they exaggerate, you know how this works." But his words didn't land the way he wanted them to. They didn't sound confident anymore. They sounded like excuses. Across the table, she didn't flinch. Her hands remained folded neatly in front of her. Her eyes locked on his. "Officer Daniels, you've had chance after chance to correct your behavior," she said, her tone firm but even. "Instead, you doubled down. You mocked citizens. You abused your authority. And you assumed no one would ever hold you accountable." The smirk he had worn all morning was gone now, replaced by a tightening jaw. His eyes darting to the officer in the corner, still writing notes. It dawned on him that this wasn't just an interview. This was a record. An official transcript that would live on long after he walked out of this room. "You don't know what it's like out there," he snapped suddenly, his voice cracking under the pressure. "You sit in an office with your files and your rules, but on the street, it's chaos. You do what you have to do." His tone grew louder, more desperate. "You think these people respect you? You think they don't hate the badge the second we show up? You don't know what it's like to be the one everyone wants to fight." For a moment, the room was filled with the echo of his outburst. He expected her to shrink back, to waver under the force of his anger. But she didn't move, not even an inch. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice quiet but sharper than anything. He had thrown at her. "I do know what it's like, Officer Daniels," she said, her words deliberate. "I know what it's like to be stopped for no reason, to be spoken to like you don't belong, to be treated like less than human. And I know what it's like to stand on the other side of that power, watching you abuse it." Her eyes pierced through him, unflinching. "That's why I'm here, because people like you think fear is respect. You think intimidation is justice, and you think that uniform shields you from accountability. But it doesn't. Not anymore." Daniel's face flushed, his fingers drumming nervously against the armrest of his chair. The confidence that had carried him for decades in traffic stops, in interrogations, in the locker room, bragging sessions, was slipping. Piece by piece, it was being stripped away, leaving behind a man who suddenly looked smaller, weaker, exposed. The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't just heavy, it was decisive. Even the other IA officer in the corner had stopped, writing for a moment as if pausing to acknowledge the shift that had just taken place. Daniel swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice. "So, what happens now?" he asked, though the question sounded less like defiance and more like resignation. She sat back, her composure unshaken, her authority undeniable. "What happens now is that this investigation moves forward," she said. "You will be placed on suspension pending review of these charges. Your actions will be presented not just to this department, but to the public, and the days of you hiding behind your badge are over." The words hit him harder than any insult ever could. For the first time in his career, Daniels felt powerless. The room that had always felt like his domain now felt like a courtroom, and he was the one on trial. And as he sat there, staring at the woman he once thought of as insignificant, it dawned on him fully. She wasn't just here to question him. She was here to finish what had started years ago. To close the loop, he thought, would never circle back. The tables hadn't just turned. They'd been flipped entirely, and there was no way for him to flip them back. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching out longer than the last. The conference room felt different now, heavier, final, as though the air itself understood something irreversible had just taken place. Officer Daniels sat slumped in his chair, the confidence drained from his posture, his eyes darting between the folder of evidence and the woman across from him. She didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to pound the table or lecture. Her calm, steady presence was the sharpest weapon in the room. Everything she had laid out, the complaints, the witness statements, the footage, was no longer just paper and ink. It was a mirror, one that showed Daniels exactly who he had been, all these years, stripped of the shield he thought would always protect him. "Officer Daniels," she began, her tone professional yet unyielding. "Based on the evidence reviewed today, you are being placed on immediate suspension pending termination. Your case will also be forwarded to the State Oversight Committee for review of possible criminal charges." The words cut deeper than he expected. Suspension he could handle. He'd seen officers ride those out before. But termination. Criminal charges. That wasn't just a stain on his career. That was the end of it. Everything he thought made him untouchable was crumbling right there in the cold. Quiet room. Daniels opened his mouth, searching for one last defense. One last card to play. "I've served for 20 years, he said, his voice hoarse. "You can't just erase that." She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Your service doesn't excuse abuse." "Daniels, it makes it worse, because you knew better." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint scratching of the pen in the corner as the internal affairs officer documented the exchange. Daniel's shoulders sank further. The fight gone from his eyes, it was over, and he knew it. She gathered the papers calmly, sliding them back into the folder with the same precision she had used to dismantle his defenses. As she stood, her voice softened, but her words carried the weight of finality. "This job is about trust. You broke it, and the people you hurt deserve better." Daniel sat frozen, staring at the table. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. No swagger left to hide behind. The badge that once made him feel powerful now felt like a weight pulling him down. He knew, deep inside, that it was no longer his to wear. She walked to the door, her heels clicking against the floor with the same steady rhythm that had announced her arrival. But now, the sound wasn't just commanding. It was triumphant, not loud or showy, but the quiet triumph of justice finally catching up as she stepped into the hallway. The officers outside glanced up, their expressions a mix of curiosity and relief. They didn't need details. The look on her face told them enough. Something had shifted in the precinct that day. A shadow had been lifted, replaced by the reminder that even those who think they are untouchable can and will be held accountable. Inside the room, Daniel stayed seated, staring blankly at the folder in front of him. The silence was suffocating for the first time. He realized that the very system he had hidden behind was the same system dismantling him now, and the person leading it, the woman he once tried to humiliate on the side of a road, had become the one to strip away his false sense of power. Justice had been served, not with fireworks or grand speeches, but with calm persistence, undeniable truth, and the steady hand of someone who refused to be silenced. And as the doors closed behind her, she knew this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a message to every officer who thought the badge made them untouchable. To every citizen who had been mistreated, and to every young woman who had ever been told to know her place, the tables had turned, and the balance of justice, even if only for a moment, had been restored.